Laura Lucero, Albuquerque, New Mexico, John Morris Room. The last time Mrs. Borden was last seen alive was around 9 a.m. by her stepdaughter, the infamous Lizzie Borden, and the maid, Bridget. Now, when she was killed, Lizzie's sister Emma was out of town and Mr. Borden was in Fall River, as was Uncle John. Lizzie said she was downstairs ironing handkerchiefs. Mrs. Borden died in the very same room where Uncle John had slept the night before. This room is now one of the most requested rooms for overnight stays in the historic Lizzie Borden Axe Murder House and Museum. This room, of course, was named after Uncle John himself, the John Morris Room, also known as the Murder Room. Now, at the time of Mrs. Borden's death, killing, murder, there were absolutely no defensive wounds and there were no signs of struggle. Now, that's pretty peculiar, isn't it? Evidence is unclear whether she was facing her attacker and didn't fight back or couldn't, or if she was standing or kneeling. But we do know where her wounds were. She had one blow above her left ear on the side of her head, one between her shoulder blades that was about 4 inches thick, and the remaining 17 blows were to the back of her head and neck, totaling 19. Eventually, Mrs. Borden was found face down in a pool of her own coagulated blood. Between the blood and the stomach contents of both victims, we can say that Mrs. Borden died at 9:30 in the morning. That puts Mr. Borden's murder an hour and a half prior to Mrs. Borden's. Now, in the dining room, which is where the autopsy took place, is a photograph. And in this photograph, you can see Mrs. Borden lying face down, and you can see some of the blood around her head. But you can also see in this photograph a mirror. And the mirror has the camera that took the photo. Pretty interesting because did you know that the Borden crime scene photos were the very first crime scene photos ever to be taken in the United States? That's a pretty fun, morbid fact, I think.